The Spline Morph modifier lets you blend two or more shapes, either sequentially or with blended weights. And the only restriction is that all of the spline targets must have the same number of vertices. I'm going to do a simple 2D example here, but it would work equally well in 3D. I've got my scene set up for centimeters, and I've got the front viewport maximized. I'll go over to the Create panel and choose Shapes, Splines, and we'll do a star primitive. Click on Star, and then let's enable snaps. I'm snapping to the grid in 3D. Click at the origin and drag out to the right, and watch the parameters over in the Create panel. When the radius 1 value reads out 100 centimeters, release the mouse, and then drag to the left to set radius 2 to 10 centimeters, and click again to finish that star. While the Create panel is still open, let's rename the star. We'll call it Star Morph, and also give it a fillet radius of 20 centimeters for fillet radius 1 and 2. 20, tab 20, and enter. And then right-click in the viewport to exit that Create panel, and use the hotkey to turn off snaps, which is S. And we've got one star, and I want to morph this with another star. So let's make a duplicate of that. And since it'll be a clone, it'll have the same number of vertices automatically. Go up to the Edit menu and choose Clone. We'll make it a copy and name it Star Target. Click OK. And that Star Target object is selected. Go to the Modify panel and just invert radius 1 and 2. Set radius 1 to a value of 10 and radius 2 a value of 100, and change its color so that we can differentiate these two. I'll make Star Target red, and we'll go back over to Star Morph and make that one a bright green. Additionally, I will want to render Star Morph, so I'll open up the rendering rollout and flip the switch to Enable in Renderer and Enable in Viewport. Set the thickness to 1 centimeter. And if we get in really close here, we can see something, and that is that optimization is turned on. So these straight segments are being optimized, so there are no subdivisions here, and that's a problem if we're going to morph this. So in the interpolation rollout, disable optimize, and now we've got good segmentation there. I'll increase the number of steps between knots to a value of 10. Now we're ready to apply the Spline Morph modifier. I'll zoom back out again, and from the modifier list, choose Spline Morph. Enable Show Knots, and we can see those control vertices if we get in closer there. Now we need to add a target. So in the Spline Morph modifier, under Targets, the first slot reads out None. Click on that None button, and then over in the viewport, click on the Star Target object. Let's zoom out with that object selected. Press the Z key on the keyboard. And at an amount of 50%, I'm not getting a perfect circle. But if I adjust the amount between these two objects, we see that it is indeed working. The default mode is progressive. We'll get back to that once we have a little bit more to work with. But first, let's address the problem of not getting a perfect circle when the amount is 50%. I'll set that back to 50% numerically. And it would be nice if this were a perfect circle. Let's say the director or art director said it needed to be a perfect circle. Well, we could just add another spline target, and that would, of course, be a circle. But remember that we must have the same number of vertices on all of the morph targets. So how many vertices are we dealing with here? Well, we can check that out just by looking. If we set the amount back to 0 and count out all those vertices, we can see that there are 4 vertices for each arm of the star. Well, let's make it interesting. I'll select the star and set its number of points down here in parameters to a value of 7 instead of 6. And likewise with the star target object, set its number of points to 7. And we're still getting that same result if we go back to the spline morph and adjust its amount. A value of 50 is still not giving us a circle, so that's fine. Set it back to 0, and we can count out that we're actually getting 4 vertices or 4 knots per arm. 4 times 7 is 28, so we should see 28 knots or vertices on these star objects. We can check the knot count if we are not able to determine it just by a visual calculation. Go over to the star target and just give it an optimized spline modifier, just for the purposes of reading out its statistics. With show knots turned on, we can see them, and we're not reducing by any percent. Let's also disable Make Adaptive so we're not mangling the shape of that spline while we're looking at it. We've got a total of 28 knots or vertices. Okay, so we've established 28 is the magic number here. I'll delete that optimized spline modifier and create a circle. I'll turn on 3D snaps, go back to Create, Shapes, Spline, Circle. Click and drag at the origin. We want a value of 50 centimeters in the parameters. Release the mouse, right-click to exit that circle, disable snaps with the S key. If you need to, go into the Modify panel, just make sure that you've got a radius of 50. We don't yet know how many vertices are on this circle primitive, but we could find out by adding an optimize. We could also find out by adding a normalize, which is actually what we want to do anyway. We want to normalize this spline so that it has 28 vertices on it that are more or less evenly spaced. So with the circle selected, go back to the modifier list and add a normalized spline. Enable show knots. And the mode we want to use is insert. And we can see that when we're inserting one knot in between, in other words, bisecting each segment, we're getting a total of 8 knots. We can just increase this insert value. And if we bring that up to a value of 6, then we have 28 knots. We can also see that the first vertices don't line up here. The yellow point is the first vertex. And ideally, they should line up. And if they don't, we'll have to take some steps. All right, the circle has 28 points on it, so it should be a legal morph target. We'll go back to our star morph object. And for the first target slot, we'll just click on that button that's labeled star target currently and reassign that to the circle. So circle 001 is now the target. And we can play around with this progressive amount. And we can see that it indeed is going to a perfect circle when the amount is 100. However, it's moving a little bit. It's rotating slightly because of the misalignment of these first vertices. You can see that most clearly on the left side over here. As we play with that amount, we can see how it's actually rotating the entire spline as it goes down to the circle shape. To offset that, we'll apply an X form to the circle. Reselect the circle. In the modifier list, go down to the very bottom and add an X form. Go into its gizmo subobject mode with the rotate tool. And right-click on that. We want to enter in a Z value. And I calculated what that Z value should be. The 2 stars' first vertices are what's important here, and they are offset by 1/28th of a circle. And that works out to be 12.86 degrees. We want this rotation for the circle here to be 1/2 of that. So the circle will land halfway between the 2 star first vertices. So the Z amount here is going to be negative 6.43. And press Enter. We can close that dialog. Exit out of Gizmo subobject mode. Reselect the star morph object and adjust that amount. And we can see we've now corrected the problem. We can see that most clearly here. So it's not rotating as it morphs into that circle shape. Okay, all we need to do now is add the third morph target. So enable another slot, click the None button, and select the star target object. and now it's added. Now let's talk about the modes finally here. We have progressive mode by default, and that should really be called sequential mode. It will cycle through all of your morph targets in a linear sequence, such that if the amount is 0, you're seeing the original object shape. If the amount is 100, then you're seeing the last object in your list at full strength. And then the rest of them are divided and distributed equally among this 100% value. So with only 3 morph targets, the value of 50% will give me a perfect circle. So it's right in between star target and star morph. So now we got our perfect circle. So that's progressive mode, and it progresses through these morph targets linearly. So with a value of 0, we have the original. Halfway there, we have our circle. And at 100, we have the end morph target, the last one in the list. There's also blended mode here, which gives you individual control over the morph targets. However, there's no target for the original object here. So if you wanted to mix all these equally, for example, you would set circle 001 to 33.33 and star target also to 33.33. Now the remainder out of 100 here, which is 33.34, is applied as the weight for the original object shape, or the star morph. So that's how we can blend between all 3 of those equally. Okay, well in this simple situation, I just want to use that progressive mode and maybe attach some data to here, maybe keyframe it or apply a procedural controller to animate that shape. I can hide the other spline objects. They're just targets. I don't need them anymore. So I can select those, right-click, and hide selection. All right, that's how to use the Spline Morph modifier to seamlessly blend between different shapes.